Hey, Paul Zamek, how the hell are you?
Glenn Starchman as I live and breathe.
I know it's
I'm very
amazing.
well, mate. I love your nail polish.
Oh,
It's
thank you, thank you. I got these on the other hand too. So,
excellent,
and
excellent.
I don't know you've never saw the tattoos, the rock and roll. I
No,
got
I never saw those, man, but I see them now. I like them both.
I got them
Both
for
of them.
my
I
yeah I got them for my 45th birthday. I was, one of those weird mental health crises, I guess.
would say midlife crisis, mate.
Yeah,
Almost
yeah,
a midlife.
exactly. Well, more than midlife. I mean, at least for me. Um. Anyway, so for those who don't know, Paul, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself, like your history? Because first of all, Paul is absolutely fascinating. So this is going to go all over the place. So I'm warning everyone in advance. But anyway, Paul, all you.
How do you think so, Glenn? Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I was born in South Africa in Cape Town, and I went to lots of different schools. I was the naughtier I got, the further I got sent away. So I finally got sent to a boarding school. It was like about 800, 900 miles away.
Hmm.
But all my life I've been involved and interested in music from the time I was 6 years old. So as soon as I got my first job, I phoned the secretary or the personal assistant of the branch manager of a big record company in Cape Town every day at exactly the same time, 11 o'clock, because that was my
Hmm.
tea time. I phoned it every single day for 3 months, like Chinese water torture, bang, 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 bang.
Love it.
Have you got anything to that? So finally, they gave me an interview. I walked into the guy's office. I was 19 years old. He said, "I can't give you a job as a sales rep. You're just out of school."
Hmm.
So I said, "Well, listen, never mind about that. How much does the job pay?" So he just looked at me. He said, 120 Rand or whatever it was a month. So I said, "I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you an offer. Give me the target that you want me to set, your sales target that you want to set. And if I don't reach that sales target in a month, I will pay you the 120 Rand that you were supposed to pay me, and we'll call it quits." So that's how I got into the music business as a hustle, and I haven't stopped hustling, man.
Oh,
And I've done everything from being a country salesman, selling 8 tracks and little gramophone needles,
hmm,
through the School of Hard Knocks,
hmm,
to becoming a concert promoter, to getting to my combi and selling records from the back, you
hmm.
know, booking agent, artist manager, and eventually the company that I persuaded to hire me for 120 Rand a month, I landed up on the board of that company, in sitting in the chairman's office. They gave me the chairman's office. I had nothing else to do.
Amazing, amazing.
And so that was 1980 something. And then in 84, I was a joint managing director. I call myself a joint managing director because I just like
Hmm.
that title.
I love it.
And in South Africa, you can buy a shoebox of cannabis for like $5. So as joint managing director, I I received my A&R guy received a phone call one day from a guy called Roy Halley, who Paul Simon's producer, longtime producer,
Hmm.
and we thought it was a punk. We thought it was one of these punk calls, that he was going to be on the radio. So I said to this, his name is Barry. I said, "Barry, phone him back, and if he answers the phone, then it's really him.
Hmm.
Then yeah, let's talk." Turned out that Paul Simon was exploring African music
Mm.
and wanted to speak to us. We were an independent label. We had, and when I say independent, Glenn, in those days, the indies were Motown, Island, Virgin,
Right.
A&M, Arista. They were all independent,
Hmm.
and we licensed all those independent labels. So we were a great company. We had a great studio as well. So Paul Simon at that point was signed to Warner Brothers here in the States, but he didn't want to go through Warner's for some reason. He called us as an indie. So we put together what started off as a one or two songs, and it ended up to be like a giant archaeological dig into the into the vaults. Because
Right.
in those days, no MP3s, there was telex, and there were cassettes.
Right.
So he used to dub them on cassette and mail them to him in New York, and then he would feed back. And so, long story short, that turned into Graceland.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, that turned into the Graceland album. And we thought it was going to be very big in Johannesburg and Cape Town. We had no
Mhm.
idea what it was going to be. It won 5 Grammys. It was the beginning, the
Wow.
birth of world music before Peter Gabriel or anything else. It was Graceland.
Right.
So that's how it came to America, actually, on the coattails of Graceland.
That's incredible. See, this is why I love talking to you because that's a story that I didn't know about you. So, and I'm sure there are thousands of them, but um, just for reference, I still use the time that we met. I mean, literally, I just met you when we started walking down the street. I think it was like 5 blocks to the Hotel Majestic, and like every 20 feet, somebody would stop. Hey, Paul. Hey, Paul. Hey, Paul. So you're definitely a mover and shaker. Um, yeah, I want to talk more about that later on because I had a great time that meeting. That was a lot of fun. So you ended up in the States, and did you initially move to Nashville, or was that after?
No, I moved to Nashville. I've been there many times. In South Africa, when you travel from South Africa and you go anywhere, you try and do the whole thing. I mean, you wouldn't go just to London. You would go into New York because you're out of the country. You might as well move.
Hmm.
So I would always come to Nashville because it was one of the three major music centers in America.
Hmm.
And I fell in love with Nashville because I was standing at a traffic light one day and I saw an elderly gentleman in a car reading what I thought was a newspaper. I thought to
Hmm.
myself, this must be real fucking slow. This must be real slow for
Hmm.
a guy to be reading a newspaper at a bloody traffic light. And I looked closer and he was reading sheet music.
That's
And I
incredible.
could just imagine what was happening in his head because he was reading the music and he was playing it in his head. And I thought to myself, this is exactly where I want to live one day.
Hmm.
So I made up my mind in that moment and I worked towards it. So when we arrived, my late wife and I, we arrived in 1985 with 5 animals and $3,000 and a few phone numbers. And that's how we started.
And by the way, condolences on your wife.
Thanks, thanks.
Very incredible lady.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe.
so again, there's so much content here. I don't even really know where to start. So I'm just going to kind of ramble a little bit. All right. Um, so at what point did you start managing acts?
By default, by total
Okay.
default, because I was not a manager in South Africa. South Africa is a very small music scene. We were one or two artist managers, and they mostly relied on the record labels and the booking agents to help them with their careers.
Hmm.
As you know, in America, it's a whole different scene. So I was working with a band called Exile from Kentucky, great
Hmm.
band. They did Kiss You All Over, and they had 13 number one consecutive country hits. And one of the guys, one of the lead singers, Les Taylor, left the band. And I'd worked with him in South Africa and became really good friends. And
Hmm.
for some reason, he asked me to manage him. So I
Hmm.
kind of just fell into it. And luckily, I'd gone through all these other various stages of the business. So I kind of knew what was what and who did what and who played the roles. And
Hmm.
all I did was make sure that I was assembled a great team and just sort of manage that team and they had the vision for the artist. But he was already signed to a label, so I walked into that.
Ah, that's good.
Um, yeah, and then I was asked to manage a gospel quartet
Hmm.
called Stamps. They were Elvis's gospel quartet, and there was a whole different world for me, traveling
Right.
on the bus and doing love offerings instead of bloody a fee. There was no fee; it was like a love offering. Well, how the hell do you budget on a love offering? But
I'm
that was
sorry. Did you have to watch your language? I mean, because I know you're like me. Like profanity just kind of flows straight out of my mouth. So.
close to me. Well, I can't tell you too many stories about that particular moment because these guys are religious guys. But
Hmm.
put it this way: it was an interesting time because there were a lot of things going on that you wouldn't have thought of. But they're
Sure.
all great guys
Hmm.
and wonderful guys. And so we changed the name of the group. We were going to become the new sort of Oak Ridge Boys, but that didn't happen. So I moved on to other things. I was managing a young woman from Liberia. I met her through a friend of mine who was in Belgravia in London. We went to his place one evening. We had a major party and Benny Medina was there. And Benny Medina at that point, Benny is the guy who handles J Lo and Mariah Carey. He's got a big management company. But he was the guy upon which the Prince of Bel Air was based. It was his story,
Really?
his
Hmm.
actual story, yeah. And he was at that moment in time, he was writing the treatment for it. The film wasn't, and the TV series hadn't even been made yet.
Hmm.
But he was working for Warner and art. And the guy who I was my best friend who ran the international division of Warner Brothers, London and New York. So Benny happened to be in London, and we were running around at that time in a bloody limo. And the guy had a cell phone which looked like a shoebox, but it's enormous things, there's
Right.
enormous bloody things. Anyway, so during that evening, this friend of mine was an arms dealer and unfortunately was murdered for something to do with his job, I'm sure. He suggested I listen to this girl from Liberia. Her name was Anna Constance, and she was fantastic. So she came over here. We did a showcase at the Cotton Club in New York,
Mm-hmm.
and I had all the charts written out for this 12-piece band, blah blah blah. Got there on the day of the sound check, just threw them the charts. The charts were written in numbers, like the national number system.
Mm-hmm.
So these guys in New York, they go, "What the hell is this?" They had no idea. So I thought, "Oh shit!" Because we got the gig that night, everybody's coming. So I had to rush down to get some manuscript papers, and I had to get some guy to come and transpose all this, like 6 or 7 songs that were charted from the number system onto the actual music charts, so they could read the charts and they could play that chart.
That's so funny.
Another story, but anyway, so
Ugh,
that's part of my management thing. I'm now working with a girl from Muscle Shoals, Alabama, called Tasha. Her name is Tasha Hill, and she's doing a gig next Friday night in Huntsville.
mm,
And so, I still keep my hand in it.
excellent, excellent. I mean, obviously, I want to talk about one of the people you managed, but I just want to make a comment. Like when the first time I was in Nashville, I remember suddenly it dawning on me, and I think it was a meeting with you, and whoever we were meeting with was like, "Oh, I've got to go. I've got to be in Mobile, in like 45 minutes or whatever." And I'm like, and I know it sounds stupid, but it was the first time it dawned on me how close Nashville is to Alabama. Like, I mean, it's right there, and I don't know.
Like that.
It
Yeah,
doesn't seem like the South at all, but yet it very much is, right? So anyway, that was just
yeah.
a.
Nashville is like it's maybe an hour and a half drive to Huntsville,
Oh,
where
it's
the
amazing.
Rocket Center is. And we're like maybe 1.5 hours to Kentucky, to Bowling Green,
Yeah,
Kentucky.
it's
That's quite a
crazy.
far country.
It's crazy. I mean, I've said for a long time, like if I was going to move out of Seattle, I would probably be Nashville, just because.
Really, Glenn? Oh,
Yeah,
really?
yeah. I mean, I like it. I like it. It's still relatively inexpensive, right?
Yeah,
Especially compared
yeah.
to the West Coast.
Yes.
Um, and there's just a lot of music going on, you know.
Oh,
Um,
it's great. It's a great
yeah,
city. I'm very glad I came.
yeah. I mean, apparently the occasional, guy who sets off a bomb in the middle of the city, but other than that, that was just
That was
amazing.
the first time. It was a bloody Christmas Day as well. I mean, my God, haven't got any sense. I mean, really spoil everybody's Christmas just because he was having a bad day.
Yeah, no,
You could have just put a gun in his mouth and got it over with.
yeah. I'm still amazed that nobody was actually killed. I mean, that's well,
Yeah, thank
obviously
God.
except for him,
Yeah, yeah.
but absolutely amazing. So, okay, so you started managing, and you didn't just start managing, of course, in typical Zamek style. You started with like somebody big and kept going, right? Um,
Yeah.
how did you meet and end up managing Kenny Rogers? And what's the story behind that?
Well, first of all, I never managed Kenny Rogers as per se, but I met Kenny when he came to Sun City, and
Hmm.
I was his label guy, and so I looked after him and presented him with records and all this kind of stuff, and sort of set him up with Ken Cragen, who was his manager at that time, wonderful,
Hmm.
wonderful manager. And so when Kenny came to Sun City, it must have been probably 1981, 82 or something like that.
Hmm.
Kenny Rogers was the biggest artist in the world at that point. I mean, he
Right.
was just massive. He'd done, or he'd sort of segued from country to just being Kenny Rogers. So he arrived in his own bloody airplane with a whole bunch of entourage, fantastic. And he was just, we got on really, really well. And so he left, I stayed in South Africa. When I came here to Nashville, Kenny, we remained in contact, and Kenny was starting his own record company called Dreamcatcher. And Jim Mazza, who was his record guy in LA, became his partner. And for the first time in Kenny's long, beautiful, illustrious career, he was free of any kind of major label commitment.
Hmm.
So at that point, he decided to start his own company called Dreamcatcher Entertainment. And he asked me, him and Jim Mazza asked me to come on as the international guy. So what I did was, so I was part of the management team, but as far as management was concerned, Ken Cragen was still managing Kenny, and Jim Mazza was kind of co-managing us. And then
Got it.
Jim had his own team around him. So my role was to which was great, was to initiate all Kenny's new record deals and manage those relationships worldwide. So what
Got
I
it.
did then, instead of I could have signed into Warner Brothers International or any of the major international, just had done with it. But I decided what I would do is, because Kenny was such a visionary and such a scholar of the business,
Mhm.
and I could learn so much from him, and I did. I decided to do independent deals in most of the territory for two reasons. First of all, I would have a much stronger personal relationship with those labels. So I signed something like maybe 15 or 16 independent deals in sub territories.
Wow.
So for Scandinavia, it was one company. For the UK, it was another company, et cetera, et cetera. And I set them up
Mhm.
like that. So that it was a little bit more work, quite a lot more work actually. But what we got was, I decided there and then, because Kenny, he gave me carte blanche to do stuff. So we started to do some duets with some of the local artists in the various countries
Mhm.
for three reasons. First of all, it gave Kenny um, the opportunity to interface with the local superstar's fan base. It gave the local superstar bring his fan base into Kenny, and it
Mhm.
also gave the local population a chance to see this great superstar singing a couple of words in their own language. And it was a great thing
Yeah.
all the way around. So that was a lot of fun, and that lasted for about 3.5, 4 years. We did some really good business, and then eventually um, I moved on to something else within that organization.
It's amazing, amazing. I'm
Great
just
job.
I'm trying to imagine keeping 16 or 17 deals straight, though. I mean, I had difficulty doing like one or two, so I can't imagine having to do that.
Well,
Um,
luckily it was medium. And at that time, there was no South by or anything like that. And the main, and still is, the premier music marketplace in the world is Medium. And so I did a lot of the work there.
mhm.
And then, just at that point in time, trying to think then, I think email was just starting, but most of it was like faxes. It was things like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are some industries that are still that way, like the mortgage industry is all faxed. They
Oh,
refuse to use emails. Everything is faxed. So
yeah.
I unfortunately learned that doing work for a mortgage company,
Oh,
software work, mind you, which was even more frustrating. Um,
yeah.
so so let's talk about Medium a little bit. Are you still actively involved in Medium?
No, I stopped representing Medium about 3 years ago. Um, but I still go. And I
Hmm.
was there the last time just before COVID hit,
Hmm.
and I'm online with they just did a whole Medium Africa seminar, for a 3 day seminar this last week, and I get all the stuff, and I still know all the guys there. I'm still very friendly with them, and
Hmm.
still connected, but I'm no longer working for them or representing them.
Okay. Yeah.
We had fun, didn't we? We had
Oh
some
yeah.
fun.
Oh my God. I still talk about it all the time, just because it was such a weird. Yeah, it was surreal. Um, like the story I was telling you last time we talked about, sitting at the bar of the Hotel Majestic, and um, well, first of all, my bar bill was astronomical because I was buying people drinks like an idiot, not realizing they were like, this is what 2005, and I think the drinks were 17 euro, something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sure they're much much more now. So I brought my American style appetite for alcohol over, and it certainly added up. But sitting at the bar, and I forget names now, but I met was talking to this guy for like 20 minutes, and at the end I was like, hey, well, we were talking about licensing and stuff, and at the very end I was like, hey, what is it, what is it you do? Because I'd never asked the question, and he was the president of Harry Fox. So, um, you never know who you're going to run into.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so this is a great jumping off point. Okay, so some of the medium stories. And you're gonna have to help me with names because I don't remember who we talked to, but I remember we had a little table in what I think was a closed off section. Like I think we were the only people there for whatever reason, yet the bar was very full. That's all I remember, and it was like a round table, and there were a bunch of
Oh,
guys there. Do you remember at all?
I remember it was at the Majestic,
The Majestic,
and
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and the main lounge area was packed. and we
Yeah.
found a little sort of alcove.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was, great. And it was nice and quiet, whatever. But I remember I made the mistake of talking or asking one of the guys, and you'll know the name. I think he just recently passed away, like a year or
Oh,
two ago.
Russ Reagan.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I remember asking like, "What do you do?" Or something stupid like that. And he's like, "Well, I've produced some music." That's all he
Yeah.
said. And I stupidly followed up with like, "Well, like who?" Like a, And he's like, "I don't know," and I forget the bands he named, but I'm certain one of them was the
He
Beach
signed Elton
Boys.
John. He signed Elton John.
Yeah,
He signed Neil Diamond.
yeah, it was
Quite,
just amazing.
quite yeah.
Yeah, I felt like such an idiot, And then he's like, "Well, what do you do?" And I'm like, "I run a digital music company," like that nobody's ever heard of. So,
Well, in those days, man, in those days, you were way, way ahead of the game. I mean, you were right
yeah,
from the very end.
yeah. I mean, I don't really want to talk about that time, but it was a lot of fun, a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I think at our peak we had something like 2.5 million tracks or something like that. But
There's nothing more frustrating than being too far ahead of the game.
yeah, yeah,
Uh, I'm not sure which is worse, being behind the eight ball and not being able to catch up, or
right.
being ahead of the game and just seeing somebody else follow you a year or two later and do exactly what the hell you were doing, and now they're successful, and you've gone into something else because whatever you were pioneering in those days didn't catch up. And I think that's kind of what may have happened to you in those days, that your vision and your energy and everything that you had going for yourself, Glenn, was just phenomenal, man. I loved working with you.
Thanks, man. Thanks. I think we really dropped the ball when we started working, basically trying to compete with touch tunes, and that never went anywhere. Like it was such a disaster.
Yeah,
That's part of why I don't want to like to talk about it, because it's,
painful.
yeah, my lead investors were horrible humans. So, I'm sorry, they weren't horrible humans. They just made some bad decisions, and because I had taken on so much money from them, I kind of was beholden to whatever they had to say.
Yeah.
Right. So, anyway, live and learn. It's the last time I did anything with digital music. Let's put it that way. um,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
But you've been in management yourself.
yeah, sort of. I mean, I dabbled in it a little bit, and it's a great way for me to lose money. Just like my
Yeah,
record label stuff, I always lose money on it. It's, a passion project.
yeah.
Um, but you quickly find out that many musicians are childlike, I guess. How's that?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. There's
so,
a certain sort of thin wall between the creativity
mhm.
and and everything else.
Yeah,
So
exactly, exactly. There's also, and I know I'm talking about the band I manage specifically at all, but um, there's a certain sense of entitlement, even from people who only sell 50 seats.
yeah,
That
yeah,
is really weird, and I have certainly met tons and tons of great musicians, and I have to say that because 99% of the people who come on my show are musicians. So I'm not talking about you, you know, anybody who's been on. Um, but yeah, there's this sort of, and I think it happens with artistry in general, though, right? I
yeah.
think artists just generally, entitlement is not quite the right word, but I think you know what I mean. There's a
You have to have a certain confidence and a certain ego attached to, and a lot of the artists that I've worked with over the years are two completely different people. They're one animal on stage and a completely different animal off stage.
hmm
And they can be real quiet off stage and then they come alive on stage, or who knows, quite opposite. But I sort of liken it to like, when an artist takes off, and this is just general, I'm not pointing my finger at anybody
right,
specific at all. But when an artist first takes off, they're the sweetest, kindest, loveliest people in the world because they need you. When
hmm
they get to a certain plateau, they become absolute fucking assholes. And
right,
they don't get, you can't even talk to them anymore. And they just, me, 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 me. And then they plateau and then they start to either dip and they become very nice again.
right,
So, you know,
right,
and it's kind of the graph, it's kind of like the career graph, you know, 2 years to get there, 1 year to be there, and 2 years on the way down. So it's a 5 year career span.
right.
And the temperament goes with the sort of the waves with the graph.
Yeah. Yeah, and definitely. I mean, I've met a lot of extraordinarily, humble musicians. To the point of, and I've had a few on my podcast too, people I've known for a while, but even just saying something like, hey, I really appreciate your music. I'm a fan. And they're very humble. They're like, oh, that's amazing. And in some cases, we're talking about people who sold, not millions, but, hundreds of thousands of units,
Yeah, yeah,
and they're, extraordinarily gracious,
yeah,
and there are others that, aren't, aren't so gracious.
yeah, yeah.
Like you'll say, the exact same thing. I'm a fan, and they'll say, so fucking what?
Yeah.
Right? And you're like, well, I'm just trying to say that, I appreciate what you do. I would never say that to anybody if they said they were a fan of anything I did. I'd be very, very humble about it.
Yeah.
Um, but
It's
I,
fascinating. And it's a huge responsibility, Glenn, as you found out, in management, because the commodity as such that you're dealing with is somebody's talent, somebody's soul, basically. They're
mhm,
giving you the responsibility of looking after their very being. And so, therefore, one has to be really, really careful. One has to always think of the artist's well-being and everything. How can you create the platform for this artist? But one thing I used to say to my artists was that I expect you to work twice as hard as me,
mhm,
because I can go into another room and find another artist.
right.
You, on the other hand, are stuck with yourself. That's it. You can't find another you. You are you.
That's
So
true.
therefore, it's your life. On the other hand, be careful with it at the same time.
Right. How, so I've read a lot of books about, the music industry and whatnot, and mostly, memoirs from rock stars. And one thing that I found really interesting is a lot of the managers that would, really get involved in the personal life of the artists that they're managing. Um, and I'm thinking, people like, Doc McGee, for example, who was very, very, very like, into everything that happens, and, in the social lives even of his artists. Um, for yourself, like, how did I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase the question. How how involved did you get with the people that you were managing, your artists?
Well, it's a fine line, because
Hmm.
that's why they call it a personal manager.
Right.
Because you're managing the person. So you're not the business manager. You're not the A&R guy. You are the personal manager,
Hmm.
which means that you have to take this thing very personally, which means that you have to get involved in these people's lives.
Hmm.
And besides setting it up properly, for example, never ever suggest an attorney, never ever suggest an accountant. What I
Hmm.
would do is I would say, here's a list of 5 people, 5 attorneys, and 5 business managers or 5 accountants, and you interview them and you choose. I don't have anything to do with that choice. That's your choice,
Right.
because I don't want to touch your money at all. So that's the first thing that I would do. I would separate myself from that aspect of the business. I would give them advice, and then once they've chosen, I would of
Hmm.
course interface with their team.
Hmm.
Um, but yes, I mean, when the artist is having a few drinks on the road, and he or she is phoning me at 3 o'clock in the morning and bawling her eyes out, or screaming at me about whatever the case is, you have to take the call.
Hmm.
You have to cape them. You have to bring them down. You have to put a dummy, a pacifier in their mouth with
Right.
some nice attachment.
Right.
Um, but yeah, it's very personal. It is, and you become involved in their life.
Interesting.
You can't be a little bit pregnant. You're either in or you're not.
Have you read The Heroin Diaries, Nikki Sixx's autobiography?
No.
Okay, it's a really fascinating read, and it's a really fast read too. But um, the beauty of that one is that he actually kept it is literally his diary entries, from being on the road. Um, but there's a couple of scenes in there that are really interesting to me, and one is where he would, like 3 o'clock in the morning, like you said, would call his manager and say, "I need $25,000, like now," and he
It's
would need
Doc
it, of
McGee,
course.
by the way.
Yeah,
It's Doc McGee.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Which is why I brought
Yeah,
him
who
up.
lives in Nashville. Who lives in Nashville, by the way.
Oh, does he really? He's a fascinating guy. I actually met him kind of in Tokyo one time. A friend of mine called me up, and I was living there at the time. And he called me up and he said, "You have to get down to this bar right away," and didn't tell me why. So I went, and it was karaoke. and it was half of Iron Maiden, Bruce Dickinson and Steve Harris, singing karaoke, and Doc McGee sitting there with his, his infamous cigar, and they were just hanging out, just like having a great time, singing Iron Maiden songs
Great.
for
I remember
karaoke.
that.
Yeah,
Fantastic. What a memory.
yeah. I didn't really get to talk to anybody, but it was fun, and I didn't have a phone or a camera with me, so it was like super bummed. But other than that, it was a blast, and it was funny because I don't think anybody in the bar knew who they were,
Yeah.
and it was kind of an expat bar
They
too.
loved it.
Yeah, yeah. It was.
They loved it back then. They were
Yeah,
anonymous.
I think it was when Bruce had just cut his hair too, so he was kind of unrecognizable. But one guy in the bar actually said, "You're not as good as the original," or something along those lines, as he was singing one of the songs, and I thought that was hysterical, right? So, yeah. So I was gonna ask a question about if you had ever gotten phone calls like that, but I won't. But so anyway, what Nikki Six would do is, he'd call him, Doc in the middle of the night, basically, and say, hey, I need, X whatever, and it was always for heroin, right? I mean, it was never for anything else. It was just like, hey, I need to get my fix, and it eventually got to the point where they, hired mediators and therapists and all sorts of things that would basically interject at that point. But he would basically just say, at first, sure, right? And then eventually he had to get to the point where it's like, look, you're in danger of dying. I can't do this anymore. And so to me, I found that a really interesting conflict of interest because, well, not a conflict of interest, but a very bad situation to be in, right? Because if you say no, you run the risk of your artist basically saying, well, fuck you, right? And moving on. But if you say yes, then as the manager, from a fiscal standpoint, you run the risk of your client dying, and then you're out of money. So it's sort of a no-win situation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's something that there's no way that I could ever deal with, right? I mean, because the moral conflict to me would be um, super high, you know. Um,
Yeah. I mean, there's a fine line between being an enabler uh, to, to the nth degree where you can actually drive this person over the edge, or risking, your relationship just, bombing. And there's nothing worse, or there's nothing anybody can do if an artist is uncooperative,
mhm.
um, and they can do that just like that.
Yeah.
I'm working with a couple of platforms at the moment that are in the technology area, and
Hmm.
what I find very encouraging at the moment, and you and I, as sort of pro artist people, um, there's a lovely sort of movement towards transparency with the Article 17 in the EU and the UK, and the
Hmm.
MMA here, with the MLC being created to finally have some royalties on streaming, etc., etc. So the movement is towards transparency and fair compensation for the artist. And
Hmm.
what I think people are beginning to realize, and I hope, and I'm certainly one of them, and I've always known this, is that the artist always has the control.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, since the 1700s, when the publishing and everything came into being, they went from patronage, from royal patronage,
Hmm.
to indentured servant,
Right.
through the contractual labyrinth. And so they are the creators, and they are without a song, there's nothing. Without a performance, there's nothing to do. There's no industry.
Hmm.
But they've always been the sort of the on the lower end, believe it or not.
Hmm.
Just generally, with all the different contracts they've got, recording agreement, publishing, all this other kind of stuff. And so they don't own their own work. Well, what's happening now is that artists are beginning to understand this, that they have the control.
Hmm.
So, and there are a lot of platforms that are being developed right now, which is leading towards that, and making sure that the artists, through whatever technology is available on an app, um,
Hmm.
can manage their own career to the extent, look where their royalties are, and divine their own sort of copyright controls and all that other kind of stuff. So that's exciting.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. One of my first guests, a good friend of mine. He was on a label in Seattle that I bet you can probably guess the name of. Um, and they still owe, what is it? I forget the exact numbers, but high five figure, mid five figures, I guess,
Yeah.
on advances that they received in 1989,
Yeah. Well,
right?
there's under-recouped advances. Well, it's like a college. It's like a college, whatever they call it, college loan, or whatever the case is.
Yeah.
It follows you for the rest of your life. And it will follow you to your next label as well, unless the label forgives it, or unless the other label buys it off. You're gonna have this thing around your neck.
Yeah. And the most interesting part is that he didn't even know. I had to show him. He's not a very technical individual, but I had to show him that, you know, the number of plays he'd gotten on the, Spotify and Tidal, or, all of the various sources. He didn't even know. Like, there was no accounting at all that came back to him from those. And because of that wonderful clause that most recording agreements have, which is, or any, future format that may be invented, right?
Yeah,
So no control of the music whatsoever. It just kind of goes everywhere.
yeah,
And, the reporting is abysmal if existent at all.
yeah, yeah. Well, now with NFTs as well, with non-fungible tokens as well, it's another whole revenue generating item or area, and we're beginning to think of where are the rights? Does that fall under whatever technology could be invented in the future? And they also have this. They also have the territory. So they have it for the universe. I can
I
knock
love that. I love that clause. I mean, why wouldn't you try to put it in though? I mean, I don't blame in fact, I put that in just
Yeah,
because I find it kind of funny more than anything.
yeah.
Um, like, no, you don't get money because that was streamed on Mars, right?
No,
I mean,
exactly.
so, you know,
Because by the time it comes back here, it's going to be different. But there's also another thing which artists don't understand, and that is a accounting thing called CTA,
hmm
charge to artists. And so a lot of the times when an artist is having a wonderful meal after the gig, and they're having a fantastic time, they're inviting all their friends over, blah, 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 blah.
right.
When they get their royalty statement, they see, well, that dinner that I had at that restaurant with, all my friends, I mean, I thought the label was, because the label guy picked it up. He said, "Oh, give it to me, I'll take it." So he signs the check and he gives them the card, but it goes right back to the artist. So
Yeah.
that's part of the under recoupment sometimes. I mean, not all the time, it doesn't happen all the time for sure. But it
I know
happens.
of, yeah, I know of at least one case where a very unscrupulous record label sent an artist flowers, like an enormous, super expensive bouquet, and charged them for it.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
exactly.
So it's like, come on. Or charging for phone time. That's another one that I've heard of. I don't know how common it is, but well, we had to talk to you on the phone, and our cost is X. I It could be an isolated case, but I've heard it.
Yeah.
Um,
I haven't heard that one. I haven't heard that one. But I've heard that, of course, with attorneys and notorious with a little clock on the
oh,
deck.
jeez.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm hoping it's an isolated incident, and I also hope I didn't give any record label execs any ideas. But you never know. You never know. I do know though that there have been cases of where a label will hire somebody to do something mundane for the artist, right? Like not managing, not publicizing, not I don't know, something really silly, and they'll share that cost amongst artists, right? So they say the salary is 100 grand a year, and they have covering 10 artists, so they'll charge the artist 10 grand a year for
Yeah.
something really stupid like an admin assistant or something like that that doesn't really directly work with the artist, or at
Yeah.
least shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Sort of like a paralegal, right? Um,
Yeah.
which has always pissed me off, being charged lawyer rates when a paralegal is working on it,
Yeah.
right? I mean that's infuriating to me. Um,
Absolutely.
but so, what do you think about things like Spotify? What do you think about the streaming industry?
Well, it's here it is. I
Right.
mean, it's here. You have to live with it. I think that the lion's share of the revenue doesn't go to the streaming industry, but to the streaming services, the DSPs. It goes to the labels, basically.
hmm
They're all right. And then the label decides who they're going to pay, how they're going to pay.
Right.
So I think Well, two things happened just recently. Number one, Sony forgave a lot of the advances. I don't know if you read that stuff many
No,
years ago.
wow.
Yeah, they forgave a lot of the just what we're talking about right now. They said, "Well,
Hmm.
what the hell? Let's take it off the book." So a lot of these artists are now free. So that was fantastic. Um, a lot of the publishing companies, Warner Chappell, Universal, they've got their own portals now where the
Hmm.
songwriter can go in and they can calculate their own royalties right there and then. They may be able to take advances off what's potentially coming towards them. So there's a lot of that wonderful stuff going on. And I think it's got to do with the newer generation, the
Hmm.
millennial generation that have seen, what happened and don't want to go down that road again. They're starting to make these very positive changes. But getting back to your question, the the splits when they first started these DSPs, as you probably remember, they had to recalculate. They had to recalculate the calculator
Hmm.
because when they did royalties, there was no such thing as 0.0001%, whatever the case is.
Hmm.
They had to actually reinvent a bloody machine just because the royalty was so infinitesimal, so minuscule.
Right.
And so the difference is that in the old days, when you bought a record for whatever it was, $20, just call it $20, $10. And you could play that record a million times if you wanted to, one purchase. Now it's exactly the opposite. Every time you listen to a song, you pay,
Hmm.
basically. And so that's the complete dichotomy, that's the complete difference between then and now. As far as the rates that the DSPs are paying to the songwriters, and the performers, that's a whole area that I can't even comment. It's so bloody tiny. You can get a million plays and you can get $5,000 or whatever it is, and that $5,000 goes to the artist. And out of that $5,000, the artist's got to pay everybody else.
Right.
So it's a globular figure given to the writer or the artist, whoever it is, and then you've got to pay your manager, whoever's on your team needs to be paid. You have to pay them out of that money. So it's
Hmm.
really bad. And with the COVID cutting down, stopping all the touring, you know, shocking stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and then there's of course the IRS, which most bands probably don't really think about, right? Unless they
Yeah,
have a good manager who, like yourself, an ethical one who's set up an LLC and do, all of this stuff. Um,
yeah,
but I had Gary Lee Conner from Screaming Trees on 2 months ago, I guess, and apparently what happened is his story is really interesting. So apparently there was a IRS agent that Young, wanted to make a name for himself, and he had found a band um, on a Seattle label. So I'm just gonna say a fucking Sub Pop,
yeah,
who he thought weren't paying their taxes, and the reason he came upon that is he went to one of the shows and saw them selling T-shirts and stuff for cash, and the guy just putting cash in his pocket. So he was like, okay, well, I'm gonna audit this band, right? So he audited the band, and then, of course, nobody pays money on their merch. I mean, nobody pays taxes on merch. I mean, unless they're big, right? And we're talking, a 200-seat club, like, nobody's going to bother.
yeah.
So he made his entire career for about a year auditing bands, almost exclusively on Sub Pop, from what I understand. I don't know all the details. And um, yeah, so the band I'm talking about, Screaming Trees, ended up owing a bunch of money, which, they had an LLC and whatnot, but they didn't really understand what was really happening, right?
Yeah,
Um, because they're musicians, not business people.
yeah.
Um, anyway, at some point that finally stopped. I think because the IRS is like, why are you going after these people who owe, like, $100, right? I mean,
Yeah,
like, the whole thing is stupid.
yeah, exactly.
Um, but yeah, anyway, there's a lot of pitfalls, I think, with the music industry and musicians, and I think people are definitely getting smarter. The musicians are definitely smarter than they used to be,
Yeah,
um, and not nearly as starry-eyed. Like I,
no,
I know cases where bands have turned down, fairly decent, six-figure, advances because they're like, it's not worth it. We'd rather do it
no,
ourselves.
yeah. Well, I think ownership is important, and I think the artists are beginning to realize that owning your own compositions, owning your own masters, owning whatever you can is your real estate. I mean, that's your property.
Hmm. Well, and especially the publishing, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that I don't think a lot of artists understand even now. Um, because that's, I mean, we could probably talk for 3 hours about this, so I don't want to really dive into it. But I mean, that to me is one of the most corrupt businesses there is, and and basically, you would be an idiot to give away even 20% of your publishing rights, as far as I'm concerned,
Yeah.
right?
I
Because
would
it has
always advise my artists to keep everything you can and rather just hire an admin person, a 10 or 50% maximum, and let them do your accounting, let them do all that stuff, let them administer your catalog and stuff.
right.
But keep it and assign to PRS or PRO, ASCAP, BMI, CSAP,
Hmm.
let them handle the performances. But that's basically trying to keep everything in house.
Yeah, it's. I Do you think that record labels are becoming more ethical or less ethical as they consolidate?
I think they're becoming more ethical, and that's just me being sort of optimistic.
Right.
But I think there's a new breed, younger people, not so much the cigar chumping, welcome to the machine kind
Hmm.
of guy. I think that there are people who are much more sympathetic towards the artist's situation and are helping them in that area.
Yeah, I mean, I hope you're right. The consolidation worries me a lot. Um, but I mean, it's already done, and I think it's feasible that we might end up in a situation where we have one label or two labels, right?
Yeah.
Because we're
Well, we've got,
basically down to three now, right?
yeah, exactly. They're going to be one of that soon. Then, if it's not already, they're going to be three of everything. Three hamburger or three fast foods, three cold drinks, three
Yeah.
cars,
Yeah.
but never three political parties.
No, which is weird, right? It's
Yeah.
so weird. Um, yeah, I mean, well, politics in the U.S. is yet another one of those those albatrosses that we could dive into. um, one thing we haven't talked about at all is COVID, and I'm actually kind of glad because I think this is the first time. Of course, I just brought it up like an idiot, but I think this is the first time I've done a podcast where we haven't talked about COVID. Um, and the reason I'm bringing that up is kind of getting back to the politics in the U.S. because um, I found that first of all, YouTube will not monetize anything that mentions COVID for the most part, unless you're a big guy. Like Joe Rogan can get away with it, and it's perfectly fine. I can't. Like I can't even do an advertisement to promote this podcast,
Oh,
probably because we talk about COVID.
really? I had no
Really,
idea.
it's
Wow.
amazing. Um, and it took me a while to figure out why. It started with Blaine Cook from The Accused, and he was my second guest, and so I was still kind of cutting my teeth, and he also owns or used to own two restaurants. Now I think it's down to one. Um, and I was just asking him how things were affecting his business. That was it. Like nothing controversial at all. And when I submitted an ad to YouTube, um, they have an automated system that basically goes through and checks content, which is terrifying to me. But anyway, so they do that, and they immediately came back and said no.
Wow.
They denied the ad simply because we were talking about COVID.
Huh.
Yeah, because it's considered a controversial topic.
Oh, but current politics isn't.
Well, see, and this is what I don't understand, because I know people who do monetize, and my goal is never to monetize, by the way. I don't care. This is an act of love. Um, but I know people who do monetize, and they talk about COVID, and they'll have people on that are, you know, controversial, I would say, in their opinions,
Yeah.
and they're fine. So
Yeah.
I think it's more of the smaller guy kind of loses out, in
Yeah.
this situation.
Yeah.
And there are other topics that you can't talk about. And actually, I'll send you in case if you haven't read it already, the YouTube, I forget what they call it, but basically it's a code of conduct,
That's
basically.
the user the user licensing agreement or something like that.
Yeah, but there's a name. It's a really like draconian name too. It reminds me of like the movie Brazil. It's like YouTube something. I forget what it is, but I'll send it to you afterwards, just because
Oh, I see that.
it's an interesting read. Like you can talk about anything sexual, you can talk about anything like that, but there are certain things that you can't talk about that are within that realm. Um, it's so weird. And drugs, same thing. You can talk about drugs, but if they think in any way that you're promoting or whatnot, you
Setting.
can't. Yeah. Um, and I had to walk that line recently because I had a guest on who um, actually, let's talk about marijuana because I finally listened to your smartest person in the room podcast.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, yeah, it's a great one. And why that doesn't have more views, I don't know, because it's a really interesting podcast. I didn't know that you were involved in that industry at all. So,
Yeah.
do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I've been a user since 1967.
Well, good for you.
Yeah, and I've never had a bad one. But actually, what happened was that I was a co-producer of a concert here in Nashville on November the 12th, 2019.
Hmm.
And James Burton was the wonderful guitar player,
Hmm.
his 80th birthday. So Brian May from Queen came in, and Joe Walsh came in, and everybody wanted to play with James. And I was lucky enough to be one of the co-producers. Anyway, so backstage, there was this really, really great, in fact, actually it is just here. There was this great line of CBD product called KM Relief.
Oh, okay.
And it was in the green room. What's called the green room, by the way? Because during the Elizabethan times and Shakespearean times,
Hmm.
and the artists and the actors always sit in one little tent on the side, but they always made sure that there was some lawn, some grass that they could sit. That's why it's called a green room. Anyway,
That's fascinating.
yeah. So this is the packaging. It's very nice, and this is
Hmm.
this is all sort of being sampled to the artist. And I love this album. It's great.
Hmm.
So I phoned the guys because I was involved in the CBD business on another level. And I said, man, I really enjoyed your product. I took it home and I used it and it worked. And they said, well, why don't you like to join us and sort of become part of the team? So I did.
Hmm.
I didn't know that KM stands for Cushmaster.
Hmm.
And because I phoned the guy one day. I said, by the way, what does KM stand for? It's the Cushmasters. I said, like, Kush? He said, yeah. Turned out that these guys are award-winning cannabis purveyors,
Hmm.
and they won the first and second prize of the High Times Award, blah blah blah. It's just a lovely bunch of guys, two brothers
Hmm.
started it, and so they're based in Boulder, Colorado. No
Hmm.
surprise, and they're doing a tremendous business in the state of Colorado with 300 dispensaries. They're just now shipping into Michigan and Nevada because it's very high, as you can imagine, highly regulated, as
Right.
you probably know in Washington.
Oh, yeah.
And so, therefore, if you are manufacturing cannabis, it has to be the grow has to be in that particular state. It can't be across state lines, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, I'm involved in it, and we've just signed. I introduced them to Floyd Mayweather Senior, the famous boxer.
Hmm.
We have a line called Fifth Element 5E, which is the 5,000 milligram CBD. It's the highest milligram in the market. It's really
Hmm.
strong for fitness focused people. And so Floyd is our spokesperson, our brand ambassador. And we went to
Hmm.
Vegas a couple of weeks ago and we did some fights and stuff like that.
That's
And so,
incredible.
and for me, marijuana and music, I don't know. I mean,
Right.
what? Yeah,
Yeah. I believe
can you?
I believe you called it Eminem, and it was funny
Yeah,
because I kind of I wasn't really watching. I was kind of like doing something else, but I had it in in the background, the
yeah.
podcast, and I was like, why is he talking about Eminem all of a sudden? Like that was so weird. And it was like I went back and listened. I was okay, that makes sense. I was like, what is? I mean, I'm sure Eminem smokes a lot of marijuana, but you
Oh,
know,
yeah. Yeah.
I, um,
And I'm sure that I'm sure that when you smoke marijuana, you like to enjoy a few M&Ms.
right, exactly. See, that's my problem. I have only recently started. Well, about a year and a half maybe, because I never liked it. I didn't like the high, and I realized it was because I always did it after I'd been drinking, and so the high was totally different. The body rush, I just couldn't stand it.
Yes, yes.
Um, but then when I started doing it more recently, it's almost all edibles.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I way prefer, I don't like to smoke at all. I don't like the taste of it. I don't like the smell of it.
No, I don't
Um,
blame you.
yeah,
And
and
also, it's not good for the old chest, man.
not at
Shouldn't
all.
have-
Then again, I mean, I'm a heavy smoker, so but it hurts a lot more than cigarettes do. I mean, a hell of a lot more.
Well,
Um,
because the cigarettes, you inhale it with grass, you just suck it
right,
in.
right.
It's a whole different method of inhalation.
Yeah. What is the legal status in Tennessee right now? I
Oh man,
should have
this
looked it
is
up.
the last state in the union. They probably just burned it to stake and they found it.
That's right. They probably have agents listening to this right now saying, oh, let's go after that Zamek's house, right?
Yes,
It's good. Yeah, I'm sure if they did that though, Nashville is I'm sure crawling with people with large amounts of marijuana sitting around, so
yes,
they would be busy for quite some time.
they would be exactly. They'd be very busy.
Yeah, I assume it's probably something like Austin, where the police kind of like, yeah, fuck it,
Yeah,
versus
I
like
mean,
in Houston, they'll take you down, so.
yeah. No,
Um,
I think there's a certain latitude here, with the artists and the entertainment business and everything that keeps Nashville Nashville.
right.
They're not going to try and not going to try and jeopardize that.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it's just silly. I mean, the whole thing is silly. Um, like technically, I break the law because um, a friend of mine makes edibles that are incredible. I mean, like 250 milligrams, sort of incredible. Um,
Yeah.
and you can't buy those in the store. I think we max out at like 125. I think something like that in Washington. But yeah, even half of a 250 milligram, and you're feeling pretty damn
A
good.
lot. That's a
Yeah.
lot. Yeah. And the thing with edibles is that you never know if it's going to hit you in the middle of a sentence 2 hours later. You know.
I love that. I love that. And I know that that's what a lot of people don't like.
Yeah.
But one of my favorite things to do is like eat one of those cookies and then fall asleep because the
Yeah.
dreams are just like insane.
These are unbelievable. Yeah. When
Exactly.
my wife, when Des, I didn't. She got lung cancer, so we didn't smoke around her, and I stopped
Uh,
smoking cigarettes about 10, 12 years ago. But anyway, and I used to smoke like a trooper, and I loved every single cigarette I ever
yes,
smoked.
yes, yes, you
Anyway,
did. I remember.
do you remember?
You gave me a run for the money, buddy.
Anyway, so what she did was she boiled the cannabis with in just an olive oil, and she made her own extraction.
Hmm.
So I took like maybe half a teaspoon, and nothing happened. So I thought, well, this is no good. So the next day, I took a tablespoon, and I was fine for about 5, 6 hours. And I was backstage with an artist talking, and as I say in the middle of a sentence, I suddenly went from here to what? And I was looking down at them, yeah. And that lasted for about 2 days, man. Talking about dreams. I mean, shit, I
Oh,
couldn't even sleep.
yeah, the extracts are they're crazy, absolutely crazy. I mean, once you use them to like cook something up, they lose a lot of potency, so it's fine. But yeah, I made the mistake with butter one time. I was making
Yeah,
taffy or something. So caramel, that was what it was, caramel. My girlfriend was making caramel,
yeah,
and I tasted some of just the raw butter.
yeah,
Same thing, man. And it took a long time to kick in. Probably 2 or 3 hours.
yeah.
And
But
when
when
it
it does,
did, yeah, when it did, I literally was laying on the bed and holding on to it like I was gonna fall off. you know?
I know the feeling, man. Well, with Cushmasters, they make it's mostly concentrates. They
Hmm.
don't have any smoke. There's no flour.
Ah,
It's mostly concentrates and edibles. And they have the gummies and the caramels, and those are the award-winning stuff. But they have the rosin and the butter and the shatter and all that other kind of stuff. And I've been to their factory and I've seen how they do it. Actually, it looks like honey. It looks
right.
like as they extract them, they press them down, and then they sort of roll them out. It looks like honey coming through them, and they have sheets, and they basically
Hmm.
bake them, and then Bob's your uncle.
Yeah, shatter is evil. I've only done it once, and just pure
Nice though.
evil.
It is
Oh
nice though.
man, that and dabs, which all the cool kids do, right?
Yeah,
I've
Dad,
done,
you said dad pipes.
yeah, I did it exactly once, and I would never, ever. I mean, I used to do a lot of LSD, a lot, a lot,
Yeah,
a lot.
yeah,
I would say I was higher from a dab than I was
yeah,
from any of the LSD I ever did. I mean, I was
yeah,
just out.
yeah. And they've
You
got
know,
these great little dad things. But the thing with that is that look, I'm an old chap by now, and I've had my run with all the stuff from the last 40 years. But I can't really, I don't know how to regulate these edibles, these concentrates.
Right.
You know, when you could smoke, you kind of knew, okay, I'll smoke a half a joint or whatever the case is. You know that like in the next 10 minutes you're going to get stoned and this and that. But with this thing, you just never know. It's kind of luck of the draw, really. It's like
It
a
is.
crapshoot.
It totally is. Like I said, I'm going to say on the gray market. So basically, on the gray market is where I get my edibles, and
Yeah,
sometimes they're like outrageously strong.
yeah.
And it's just an estimate, because the person who makes them says, "Oh yeah, they're approximately 250 milligrams." I'm like, well, approximately can be a big number, right?
Yeah,
So,
no,
um, yeah, I can usually tell by how they taste, right? If they taste like weed, I know I'm in trouble,
yeah, yeah.
right? Like
Well,
serious trouble.
you should go into the cushmasters.com is is the website,
Yeah, I'm going
and
to.
have a look at their product line. It's really interesting. And of course, if you're in anywhere near Colorado, let me know because I'll give you a tour of the facility and then I can send you home with a couple of samples.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Um, they don't sell in Washington?
No, no,
No, that's too
it's
bad.
Colorado now, and then Michigan and Nevada, and hopefully we'll expand.
Yeah,
We'll
yeah.
be
I
able
mean,
to.
it's amazing how much money some of these dispensaries are making. Like it's
Oh,
absolutely
oh,
insane.
it's outrageous, and Kush Masters as well is pretty successful.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of money in this game.
There is, and one of the first dispensaries here in Seattle, Ike's, which now I guess has multiple stores in Oregon and Washington, I think. Um, their original location is something like 18,000 square feet,
Yeah,
and they were making so much money that, and obviously they couldn't bank it anywhere, right?
yeah,
Which is still the case.
probably, yeah, probably does.
So all in cash, and I've heard, and I'm probably wrong, but what I heard was at one point they were making well over $1 million a week
Yeah.
from their
Oh, yeah.
one location in cash. Like, I mean, what do you do with that cash?
Yeah. Well, that's become a problem because these dispensaries have become targets, for
Yeah,
robbery. Because everybody knows that there's no banking system,
right,
so that it's a cash business basically. And there's always cash on hand, so
right.
that's another problem.
Yeah,
Anyway,
it's amazing. Um,
well, this has been a great conversation, again. I'm so glad that we
oh, ditto,
connected
man,
all these years.
ditto, ditto. And I have to go here in just a minute. I'm sure you probably do too, but I always end with two questions, right? And for you, this is going to be kind of an interesting one. So, um, everyone hates this question, which is why I ask it. Um,
Far away.
all right. What's your favorite band?
My favorite band,
Uh-huh. Yeah, see, nobody likes it
current, current
currently.
or
Well,
current.
all time if you want. Answer it how you want.
Well, at the moment, I'm enjoying the Black Keys. I like everything they do.
They're interesting. Yeah, they're
And
really interesting.
I'm also enjoying Black Pumas. So I'm into black music at the moment, I suppose. Black
Right?
Keys,
Did you say
um,
Black Peas?
Black Pumas.
Oh, okay, good. I was like, Paul, come on, buddy. I know you have better taste than that.
Black Pumas. You know them out of Austin?
I don't. Never heard of them.
Great band. It's kind of it's a trio. And it's kind of like rocky, bluesy, soul-y kind of thing. It's really good.
Huh?
Um,
Excellent.
and then I suppose all-time bands in the world, besides the Beatles, because
Hmm.
that's a given. You know,
Hmm.
I suppose Roxy music. I used to love Roxy
Oh,
music, everything they ever did.
I love that.
And lately, more than lately,
Who?
Muse.
Oh, yeah,
Yes,
they're
yes,
really interesting too. I didn't like them at first, but it was more of I just didn't like the people who like them, I think. Right? And then I started listening to them, and yeah, they're really really tight. I mean, really really good band. Um, I the same as oh my God, never mind. I can't even think of the name. It starts with a P. Very similar, and it came out right around the same time. Anyway, I'm totally blanking. The kind of androgynous male singer, also out of the UK. But anyway, um, they did a great cover of "Running Up That Hill."
oh,
Running up the
which one?
running up the hill, running up that hill.
Uh, oh,
The Kate
yeah.
Bush song.
Okay.
Anyway, I'm so embarrassed I can't think of the name, but
Have you heard of a band called Elbow?
I have.
ELBO.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
have. I have.
nice
Um,
band.
Yeah, there are a lot of great bands out there now, and I basically stopped listening to music or quote new music for a
Yeah.
while. But
So
I'm
what's
going out.
question number two? What's question
Okay,
number two?
question number two is this is my favorite one, and then on this we're gonna wrap it up. Okay, what is something about Paul Zamek that nobody would know?
I'm not going to tell you.
Okay, how about something unique about Paul Zamek? How's that?
I was born in a core, which supposedly gives you second sight. So my
Really?
whole face was covered in skin. And when I was born like that,
Wow.
the matron or at the nursing home, her husband, I was born in Cape Town, which is
Hmm.
with the two oceans meet in Cape Town, Indian and And the matron or the lady who was in charge, the nurse, her husband was a sailor. And so
Hmm.
she asked my mother to give her the call so she could put it in a little leather thing to give to her husband to keep him safe while he was on the sea. That's something I've never told anybody.
That is really fascinating. Like I've never even heard of that
I
condition.
think it's
Like,
spelled Caul. I think it's spelled Caul.
wow.
And it's supposed, and I'm Pisces as well, and it's supposed to give you second sight. And I am susceptible to moving furniture.
Why does that not surprise me? I mean, it totally just doesn't even surprise me. In fact, nothing you say is really surprises me, Paul. Like you could be like, oh yeah, no, I was the best man at the Prince and or Charles and Diana's wedding, and I'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
A zenith moment. A zenith moment.
I love it. I love it. Paul, you're a total rock star. Thank you for taking the time, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we finally did this, mate. We've been planning it for bloody months.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
please come to Nashville.
Oh, I will. I will. Actually,
Come and do a podcast in Nashville. I'll set you up with a bunch of interesting people.
yeah, well, that doesn't surprise me at all. You have like probably the largest Rolodex in the music industry that I know. So, um, that's awesome. Paul, hey, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and let's make it not 10 years in between next time. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right,
Look
brother.
after yourself.
Love you.
Cheers, mate.
Bye.